Hey guys, I'm Anthony Rivera, a writer and director of the G-XIII animated short film, and today I'd like to show you some of the work that we're doing on the film. I'm actually doing the motion capture cleanup, among other things, for the film, and I wanted to share with you the process in the form of this tutorial. I'm going to take one of the shots from the film and show you the steps that I took to clean it up. We actually went into the studio, we captured all this with two actors. Basically what you get back from the studio is these little markers in space. And if I hit play, you'll actually see the actor moving around, laying down on the floor, basically physically acting out the scene. And it is my job to take these markers and put them to the final renderable character. So all things considered, this is actually a pretty good capture, considering he's laying down on the floor, sitting down, pushing back against the wall. I really thought there was going to be a lot of marker occlusion, but it actually looks pretty darn good. So, this is the file that we got from the studio. So all I did was just open it up, make sure all the markers are there, nothing's flying off into space, and here we go. So the first thing I like to do is go ahead and create what's called rigid bodies. What that is it creates groups of similar markers and it keeps them together. It helps with the smoothing. You can apply some smooth to it. So it helps with the cleanup, especially when there's a lot of occlusion in the scene. And not only that, I actually use it for visual reference, because if you're just looking at this, it's just a pile of dots. Right now, because he's in a T stance, it's a little bit easier to see, but once he goes into one of his, especially lying there on the ground, it's just a pile of dots to me. I can't really see what's the left leg, the right leg, the foot, all that stuff. So I personally use it for visual representation as well. So we're going to go back to frame 1. It's good to do it at a T stance because it's easier to see what's a hand, what's a foot, and then once you start playing it, then it'll follow. So the first thing I like to do is double click on one of these markers. It'll take you to the rigid bodies creation screen. Let's go ahead and select all the ones on the head, and we add a rigid body. Now if you see, if we deselect, it actually creates a rigid body marker right in the middle of all the ones that you selected. I personally like to give it a name just to keep track of what everything is. So that's the head. I like to group the torso markers, which is usually 4 of them. Torso. The hips is another. Hips. Then the left shoulder. Usually I group the ones above the elbow, below the elbow, and then the wrist and the hand together. So the shoulder actually includes the ones on the physical shoulder and the one right below and right above the elbow, because the elbow's usually right here. It also helps if you have a picture of what the actor looked like on the set. I'm going to go ahead and add this and name it left arm. And again, the wrist and the hand together. Left hand. So I'll go ahead and go through and do it to the other side. Right shoulder. Right arm. This might be a little tedious, but trust me, it helps. And it doesn't take very long. Now this is where the knee is, exactly. So these were actually placed on the knee. So I'm going to group the knee and the ones above. Left knee. Same thing with the right knee. The leg, we only have 2 markers, so left leg. You don't want to go any further than that because then you'll get into the foot. So we'll just create these rigid bodies on these two. Right leg. And we have left foot. And right foot. So now, like I was saying, it actually, you can see it a lot better. If there's something flying off into space, you'll be able to physically see that it's part of a group that's not staying together. So if we go ahead and hit play there, you can see some of the jump here, and you can tell that it's not staying with the group. As he starts to sit up, you'll start to see the hip especially jump around. There's a lot of jitter right there, so we're going to have to clean that up. But at least you can see sort of a visual representation of what this character is doing without actually applying any actor or anything to it, because the actor usually just hides the markers. Now you might be seeing that the video jumps a little bit from time to time. That's actually because my video capture software keeps stopping my recording, so just to let you know, I'm not cheating or anything. So let's go ahead and dive in. We have the rigid bodies created. We're scrolling through. We're just finding for places that the markers jump. Now you're probably going to have to scroll pretty slow for this, because some of the jumps happen in 1 or 2 frames, like those in the leg. Now if you look, everything's highlighted in green. That's because it's one long segment of animation. Some of the markers that you come across will have 2, 3, 4, like this one. It's just the way that the animation is separated out by the rigid body. So here, if we scroll in, you will actually physically see where these jumps occur. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to remove the segments just from those specific areas. The way we do this is put your cursor right before the jump, split the segment, scroll to just after the jump, split it again, and then move your cursor into it so that it's highlighted in green. It'll only highlight the one that your cursor is currently on. And let's remove it. So now if you scroll through it, you will see that, actually if we deselect it, you'll see it better, that there's still a locator that jumps out where the marker used to be. But now the marker follows the rigid body a little better. So you can go ahead and ignore that little locator. I saw that this one had another jump, so let's take care of that one while we're in here. Again, we split the segment before, split the segment after, move the cursor into it, and remove it. Now, when you're in between these segments, when you're basically in limbo there, you can interpolate the data in between the two in different ways. These are all the auto interpolation filters within MotionBuilder. If you want more control, just do control curve or sample curve, and it will actually give you some Bezier curves that you can physically move and curve and do whatever you want in between the two segments. If you're in the segment, the only thing you can do within the segment is apply a filter and things like that, but you can't Bezier, you can't do anything unless it's outside of a segment. So with these, I'd like to do a linear, just because it does a little bit better job. So now if you look on the viewport, that marker actually follows pretty good. Here's another one there. And most of the time, just by looking at it from a zoomed out standpoint, you can see where the jumps are. You'll also notice that there's little itty bitty peaks, if you will, on the curve. That will actually all be removed, like this one over here. That will all be removed when we apply the peak removal filter. But we're just looking for major jumps like that, where there's been some occlusion and MotionBuilder tries to guess where that is and fails horribly. And the reason why I'm doing this manually is because you have better control. If you just apply a smooth filter to the whole thing, it'll probably solve it, but you'll lose a lot of your animation, a lot of the capture that happened and we don't want that. So it looks like it's doing a pretty good job of interpolating. I'll actually change it to linear. Actually, linear makes it look a little floaty, so we'll change it back to rigid body. And that actually looks pretty good. So we'll go ahead and zoom out. We'll scroll back a little bit, and since we were concentrating on that foot, there might have been other things that we may have missed. And again, we want to do this almost on a frame-by-frame basis, because there's some jumps that happen just 1 or 2 frames, and you'll never catch it otherwise. And a good example of this is on the hips coming up. Now you can see it, this one here, if you scroll back and forth, there's a little bit of jitter, but again, that will all be removed by the filter. We're just looking for major jumps in the data. There we go. That's where the hips screw up. This is why you have to do it frame by frame, because just on that one frame, it jumps. The hips just completely dislocate, and every single marker on there is basically off where it needs to be. And if you didn't go frame by frame, you'd probably miss that. So we'll go ahead and zoom out. We'll scroll forward to where this jump occurs. That's a pretty big jump. So we'll zoom in pretty good. And even that you want to get rid of. Any sort of weird curve you want to get rid of. So let's go ahead and split right before and split right after. And let's remove that. Now sometimes you're going to get this also where it fixes it sort of, but it doesn't know exactly that that's not supposed to be there because it's such a huge move. It tries not to remove it. So this is where we tell it we want it to be linear. We want it to go in a single straight line from the end of this segment to the beginning of the other. Now if you see, the locator still shoots down there, but the marker actually stays where it needs to be. So I'm going to go ahead and go through and clean up this entire hips area so I don't bore you. There's like 6 markers in there, so I'll go ahead and clean that up, and I'll be right back. Alright, so the hips are cleaned up. You can still see the little locators are down there showing where they used to be. And now you can see if you scrub through the timeline that they actually follow pretty good. They don't jump out of place. I went ahead and cleaned up the rest of it also. I went through every single one of the markers, and I got rid of all the jumps and all the stuff that stood out. Now we're ready for some filters. Now because we're only applying the filters, the peak removal filters, on the markers themselves, we want to get rid of these rigid bodies. Instead of deleting them, because I don't like to delete them, actually first of all we're going to go back into the rigid bodies here and regenerate marker animation, so we won't need the rigid bodies after this, because it'll actually regenerate the animation for the markers themselves. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this updates. Regenerate marker animation. We want to do it to all the markers, so it'll take a few seconds, and now we actually have that mapped to the markers themselves. So we want to go in here to the scene in the navigator window, go under C3D optical, scroll down through all the optical markers, and there's going to be all your rigid bodies. So let's go and select them all. You can see that they're all green now. Shift H will hide them, because I don't like to delete anything ever. So now we only have the markers with the new retargeted data. So what we're going to do is actually select all the markers here in the navigator. Once they're all selected, here in the resources section, go to the filters, and we're going to apply a peak removal. You just hit preview. Now depending on how many characters you have in the scene, how many markers you have, how long your footage is, it might take a little longer, but it should be done here in a second. Sometimes it'll go to not responding on the top left like it is now, but It'll come back in a few seconds, hopefully. And it should be done removing all the peaks. There we go. So now just keep in mind you have to accept it, otherwise it will bring all the peaks back. Now I know I said that I like to stay away from the smoothing, but we're not going to do an actual smooth. We're going to do a Butterworth. So it maintains the highs and the lows of the F-curves. It's non-destructive, so we'll go ahead and apply just a simple Butterworth filter. And accept. Alright, so now all of our markers are ready for the animation. Okay, so now that we have that cleaned up, we have to somehow tell MotionBuilder what's ahead, because right now it doesn't know what part of the body any of this is. It's just a bunch of markers, so we have to tell it where's the head, where's the hips, where's the knees, all that. So the way we do this is they have a very, very nice system on doing this. You switch over to the asset browser, under templates, click on characters, and we bring in an actor. So we get this nice little purple guy standing in our scene, and we have to tell MotionBuilder where everything is. The way we do this is we move this into where our actor actually is, and I know our actor is facing the other way, so we're going to flip this over. I'm going to move it back. Actually, I think I rotated it too much. So we're just basically lining up the hips, we're lining up the arms, we're lining up the hands. And it doesn't have to be 100%, but as close as you can get it. The only thing that you want to translate is the hips. Everything else is rotate and scale. Otherwise you get dislocation. So we're going to scale this down just a bit because our shoulders aren't matching up. And if you notice, if I scale something down, the rest of it comes down with it. The same thing with the legs, same thing with the arms. The arms are a little different because once you scale one, it scales the other one also because of symmetry. So rotation, so we rotate this down to where the arm is. Now I basically took a picture that we took of the actor with the markers on, so I know exactly where all these are supposed to be. These are supposed to be right above the elbow. That's supposed to be on the wrist. That's supposed to be in the middle of the hand. So on and so forth. We just want to line everything up according to the way they put the markers on the live actor. And again, once you scale one, the other one should line up pretty good. Doesn't have to be 100%. But, oops. As long as you can get it as close as possible. The head looks like it lined up pretty good. Again, you don't want to translate, so as long as he's facing the same way your actor was facing, you'll be fine. And the legs, it looks like our actor on the set didn't have perfectly straight legs. So we're going to go ahead and compensate for that and just rotate it out a little bit from the hips so that they match up, maybe back a little bit. There we go. So they match pretty good. The knee markers are just a hair above the knee. Alright, so that looks pretty good. We actually went through and spent quite a bit of time on this, but I'm just doing it very quickly just to show you the process. Okay, so now, if you look down here, actually if you hit play, you'll see that the markers just float away. Our little actor doesn't know what marker goes where. And the way we do that is we create a marker set. So here in the marker set button, click on create. Now because it's going to be a little hard selecting the markers without selecting the actor, we're going to go ahead and go up here and hide him. So a little blue square, show hide, actor all. So he's gone. Now once we've created the marker set, you'll see these little bubbles. what we're going to do is we're going to select the markers that belong to that section and drag it into it. So what I like to do for that is I like to open up the opticals down here in the navigator so that we can drag them right from here. And actually, let me bring on screen the reference that I created from when I first did this. I just basically took a picture of the actor, saw where all the markers were, and I dragged them right to exactly where he had them. So he had 5 on the hips, 5 on the head, 4 on the torso, blah blah blah, so on and so forth. So I'm going to use this for reference. Let's drag that off. So I like to start at the top, work my way down, so we're select all the ones in the head, and then down here in the navigator, drag them into the head. I like to take all the ones in the torso, and not including the ones on the shoulder, because the shoulders have their own. So just the ones on the torso. Here, 2 for the left shoulder, 2 for the right shoulder, and here I'm just using my reference. There's 2, 3 at the elbow, 3 that control the arm, and 2 that control the hand. Now again, it all depends on your actor, where they place the markers on your actor, things like that. So this can be different per shoot. This is just the way that they did it for mine. And 2 for the hand. Okay, now we move to the hips. Now the hips, you'll notice that if I try to drag, it won't let me, and that's because MotionBuilder has a 5 marker limitation. So as long as you have 1 in the back, 1 in the front, and 1 on either side, it should be fine. So we can actually just leave out one of the ones on the side. So as long as we have 5 markers, it'll let us drag it in there. So the ones here, right above the knee, we'll drag them right into the knee. Now here you want to select the entire back of the leg, so all the way down to the heel, because the rotation of the foot's going to be driven by the 3 on the tip. So the bottom here, that's all the ones right below the knee, all the way down to the heel. So select those. Drag those in there. And if we had more markers on the foot, let's say 1 in the middle, that would tell us where exactly it's bending, then I would split it up into these 2. But because we only have just on the tip of the foot, we're just going to drag it right into the foot there and just leave the tip blank. Okay, so now we have all the markers in our little actor. We're going to bring him back. Little blue square, show hide, actor body. So there he is. Now if you hit play, you're going to see that all the markers just kind of float away. That's because we haven't activated it. Once you hit the active check mark, you hit play again, and there he goes. So this is where you get to marvel at your motion capture data, because you can actually see it on a humanoid character. So obviously it doesn't have the fingers animated, that's all going to be done by hand. Doesn't have any facial stuff, so it's just basic body movements. So in the next section we'll actually take this and map it to our rigged and modeled character. And actually, one last thing I wanted to show you before we moved on to the next section is you might be thinking that this is a little tedious to do on every character, every shot. Well, MotionBuilder has a nice little export tool here in the marker set export. We actually have one for both of our characters there. And what that does is it saves this marker set, so you don't have to drag the markers into it individually each time. I'll show you how that works. I'm going to go ahead and open up the clean with the filters. So right before we added the actor in here. So we open that up. We'll drag the actor into the scene once more. And we don't even have to move him around this time. We'll just go right to the marker set. We do import. We're dealing with the G-XIII himself. So we'll bring that in there, and you'll see that those little white dots where the markers should be. Now the way that we can get it to follow the markers on the scene is you can see the little numbers are red because there's nothing in them yet, but it knows that something needs to be in there. So the way we do that is we go down here to the opticals, the C3D opticals, we select all the optical nodes, and we drag them into the objects column there. Once we let it go, it says drop multiple markers, yes or no, click OK, and now everything falls where it needs to be. So it knows the name that it should be, and then it matches it to a marker in the scene that has the same name. So then we activate it. As soon as we do that, snaps. So this makes life a whole lot easier. We don't have to do it every single time for every character and every shot that we have to clean up. It's all done right from the marker set export. So now we get to the fun part. Now that we have everything cleaned up, the actor in the scene, now we actually get to retarget all of this animation to our modeled character. So we're going to go down here to the asset browser. We're going to search for our character. FX characters, G-XIII. We're going to drag him into the scene. We're going to merge it with no animation. And there he is. I mean, he doesn't have any clothes on, he doesn't have any armor or anything, because all that stuff will be simulated in Maya. So basically all we need here is just a basic model with a rig, just for animation purposes, to get everything finalized here, and then we bring it into Maya for all that simulation. So what we have to do first is characterize this. Even though it has a skeleton, we have to characterize it, tell MotionBuilder that this is a character, because right now all it sees is just a mesh and a rig. It doesn't know if it's a biped or quadruped, if it's in a T stance or A stance. It doesn't know any of that, so we have to tell it. So let's switch this over in the display to X-ray so we can see the skeleton, and actually you can see the actor skeleton also. This is what's going to tell MotionBuilder how to transfer the animation from here to there, is this rig inside of our actor. So we're going to zoom into the hip joint here because that's where we have to drop off the character. We're going to go down here in the asset browser to templates, then characters, and instead of the actor, we're going to do a character. We're going to drag this into our scene, into the hip joint, and then click on characterize. This is where we tell it biped or quadruped, 2 legs or 4 legs. Our little guy has 2 legs, so we do biped. And ignore all. There's going to be some error messages depending on the rig and bind pose and all that stuff, so we just hit ignore because we're going to fix all that manually. So now on the left hand here in the navigator, you're going to see the characters, and the first character, we're actually going to rename this G-XIII because some of them actually have G-XIII and G-IX in the same file, so we want to be able to tell the two apart. The first thing we have to do is go in here to the character definition tab and create a control rig. This is a very nice full body IK system that MotionBuilder uses for animation, not just for retargeting motion capture, but also for full body IK if you're going to be doing hand animation in here. This is a very nice control rig. So we create it, FBIK, because we want the full body, not just IK. So we do FBIK, and there it is. If you want to grab one of your nodes and move it around, you can see that now you can actually animate this guy pretty good. So now we're going to go back to the character settings, and we're going to change the input type to the actor. And there it snaps to where our actor is. I usually like to check off match source because it actually puts the hip joint at the actual hip of our actor, so it'll follow it a little bit more closely. You can see that our actor is at a T stance because that's actually where our physical actor was. It actually had a T stance. But the model itself is actually at an A stance. The hands are a little bit lower, and this is something that we're going to have to compensate in the animation stage of it to better match. But for now, if you go ahead and hide the actor, let's click on the little blue square, show hide, actor all. You'll see, and actually you see one little marker there that, because of the limitation, this is just the extra marker. So just Shift H, and it's gone. But now you can see that if you hit play, it's not 100% perfect, but our animation has been retargeted to our character. Now, after this actually comes the animation portion of it, where we actually tweak it and plot it to the control rig, but this is such a long process that it deserves its own tutorial, so we're going to leave that for next time. I'd like to thank you for watching this tutorial. Keep an eye on G-XIII.com. That's www.g-XIII.com. That's our production blog, and that's where we're going to keep posting some of these tutorials and behind-the-scenes footage. And hopefully we'll have this movie done pretty soon. Thanks for watching.